Hi guys, what's going on? Today we're going to be continuing the Aqshy board project, Realm of Fire board, and putting some terrain on the board finally. So if you haven't seen it yet, last week I posted a video where I took an old board of mine and he made it into the Realm of Fire from Age of Sigmar. Obviously that stuff in there can be used for any game system, doesn't have to be Warhammer necessarily. So go ahead and check that out. But today we're going to be continuing with that, and we're going to be looking at painting up some pieces of terrain from the Thondian Strongpoint just to make it pretty suitable for that board and fit in with the style. So first things first, obviously you got to base coat it, so I used just rattle can of grey. Any grey that you have is going to be perfectly fine for this, and also if you have white, the zenithal, so basically spraying from above just a little bit, is going to be quite useful here, just to establish some of that base, like light and dark highlights and shadows. You can also go with black as a base coat here, but it is going to be a little bit harder to get coverage with some of the lighter paints, like the tan Reichland flesh I think I used, or Zendari dust, that might be. Just going to take the biggest brush I have and go over all the metallic bits with lead belcher. And you're also going to see that the base of this has got a red tint to it. So what I've done here is basically just dry brush the base before attaching it to the rest with like a white that you have just to bring out the highlights, and then going to go over it in red speed paint or any contrast you have, but I do recommend thinning it down quite a lot, because that way it's just going to basically tint the highlights underneath. It's going to be quite a quick way of getting your highlights and shadows in. For terrain, obviously, you don't have to be super careful, especially at this stage, so I do recommend just using the biggest brush just to get as much coverage as possible. So for this next part, you're just going to see me get a dry brush, just take some extra bright colours, so maybe some yellows and warm colours, just to give it a quick dry brush just all over, just to bring out some more of those highlights before we take it to the next stage. We're hoping here that the warm highlights look like basically reflections of lava or fire. Whether or not that actually works out in the end is up to you, but that's the intent here. And with this dry brush, we kind of want to direct it onto the metallic parts, because they're going to be far more reflective than the marble. So you're going to avoid those mostly, but a little bit won't hurt. What I'm also going to do is just take a terrain brush, which is one of those flat ones, just bring out a lighter colour, like pallid witch flesh, and we're going to use that to draw some highlights, or paint some highlights onto the marble. And that will be all of our base coating done. So we could have taken that further and added more detail, painted all the individual elements, but personally I feel like for terrain, just getting the metallics, the main colour, which in this case is the marble, and the stone / rock, which we've obviously just tinted with speed paint here. Getting that done is half the battle, to be honest. And we can just move on to the next stage, which is going to be oil paints. So don't click off the video just yet. I know oil paints can be quite intimidating, but it is very easy, especially for terrain. You don't really need anything other than the oil paint itself and maybe some white spirits. As you can see, I'm just going to mix some red and black, or I think the black is actually smoke, is the actual name for it, but I'm just going to mix a little bit of that together to create this browny red burgundy colour. And I'm going to take that all over the entire piece and just cake it on. So whatever brush you're using for this, you're not going to be able, you probably just want to make sure that's just an oil brush for the rest of its life. Don't want to put that back into acrylics, because it's going to be absolutely ruined. And adding this white spirit stuff is going to make it dry a little bit faster, because obviously, as everyone knows, oil paints do take a while to dry. And you might be thinking, what's going on? Why am I just coating it in oil paint? But that's because we're going to go ahead and remove it later, which is something you might have seen in the previous video if you watched that. So after about 45 minutes, the oil paint should have basically set on your acrylic. There's a lot of technical stuff here going on in the background, but don't really need to worry about it too much in this case. 45 minutes should be enough to basically stain the layer and go into all those crevices, and at this point we're ready to remove it. Another thing worth mentioning is, obviously people might tell you that you need to protect your acrylics from the oil paint, but to be honest, the thing that removes it isn't the oil paint, it's the the abrasive action of whatever you're using to remove the paint afterwards. So in this case, obviously, if we're going to be rubbing it a lot with tissue or whatever sponges you have to remove that, just got to be a little bit careful and not go too crazy, because it is potentially going to take off some of that acrylic, so just be careful. Alright, for this next part, I'm just going to coat everything with a layer of varnish. I've got one of these handheld portable airbrushes, because the whole setup basically costs about 60 quid, which to me was just an easy way of getting an affordable airbrush. Ideally I'd upgrade that in the future, but it's not bad for starting out. I'm just going to coat everything with satin varnish. I am wearing a respirator here because I couldn't be bothered to set up the spray booth, but I'm going to do that for the next step. So the reason for covering everything in a varnish is because if we want to go back in with acrylic paints now on top of the oil, after that's set, the acrylics won't adhere to the surface, so we just need to basically give it something to stick to. Keep in mind that I gave the oils about 2 or 3 days just to set completely, but you can do less. I just didn't have time to get back to the project. So the reason I was protecting everything so I could put acrylics on, because I wanted to do some object source lighting. So I'm going to use that airbrush to basically coat the center of the siphon with red, and spray the inside of the walls as well, just so it looks like it's glowing. And I'm going to do the same with the gem orbs on the top of it, just to get that started. Alright, once that's done, just going to get back to my desk and grab a couple of yellows, oranges. So here I ended up trying a couple of different things. For some reason when I was dry brushing, it took off a little bit of the paint, which wasn't ideal. So I decided to do some wet blending on the orbs. For those of you that don't know what wet blending is, it's basically just taking a lot of paint that's been watered down a little bit, just to keep it wet for as long as possible. Obviously this works best with acrylics, and putting it onto a surface and then taking another color and then getting a smooth transition in between. So here I'm transitioning from red to yellow. So because I got a little bit worried earlier when I dry brushed and took off some of the paint, I decided to give it another coat of varnish on top of the sprayed on red, and then took the dry brush out again just to get some of the edges that would have caught the light from these orbs, and went in with a finer brush just to get some of the details and the most glowy points. Alright, and here's the final product. So I put that on the table that I made in the last video, with a couple of miniatures painted up quite recently as well, a couple of shots of that. So the ghouls in this video, the Royal Beast Flares, are still a work in progress, but I'll be coming out with a video next on touching up over speed painting basically. Alright, thanks for watching. Make sure you check out the other video that I mentioned before if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one.